Recently in Rhode Island, there has been a proposal from the United States Fish and Wildlife Services to open additional land for hunting and fishing. This additional land that they plan to open for these activities are wildlife refuges. Hunting should not be allowed on public lands that were designated refuges due to their initial purpose, the amount of land already available to hunters, and the impact it would have on refuge users. In this speech, I will discuss three main points about the importance of refuges and how hunting would be wrong due to the sole purpose of a refuge, how much more land is already available to the hunters, and how very little people would want to use the refuges knowing hunters will be in them. To start off, according to the OECD Glossary of Statistical Terms, a wildlife refuge is defined as an area designated for the protection of wild animals within which hunting and fishing are either prohibited or strictly regulated. The initial purpose of a refuge is to not allow any hunting, and this should not be allowed to change now years after they were designated these refuges. Based on the definition of a refuge, it is clear that the sole purpose is to protect wild animals, and hunting would do just the opposite of that. According to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, national wildlife refuges exist primarily to safeguard wildlife populations through habitat preservation. In a study done by Animal Conservation, it was found that these hunting-free reserves for game species are zones where birds find an area of reduced disturbance. These animals at the wildlife refuge should not be in danger and increased disturbance just so that hunters can have another place to kill. By allowing hunting, the current animals of that refuge would be in danger of being killed. In some cases, the reason people need to go to these places is to see the animals which live there and watch them. If hunting were allowed, then these animals would be at great risk and could eventually result in the loss of these species from said refuges. This would in turn result in less people who would come and enjoy the refuge and the wildlife within. The next point I will touch upon is that there are already so many places available to hunters across America, so there is no need for them to intrude on these refuges. According to research done by Backcountry Chronicles, it was found that the amount of public land over the United States that hunters are allowed to use is nearly 30%. This is nearly 1/3 of the entire country that is available to hunters, not including the refuges that some already use. There is no reason that these hunters need even more land available to them for their sport, and they should not take advantage of these refuges. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service has proposed expanded hunting and fishing opportunities at 97 national wildlife refuges and 9 national fish hatcheries. There is no need to do any of this and open any of these wildlife refuges up to hunters. This would be wrong because there's already so much available to them that these 97 new locations are not needed. This proposal would cover more than 2.3 million acres and be the single largest expansion of hunting and fishing on federal properties, according to the USFWS. This amount would be added to the percentage that hunters already have access to, adding so much more onto their available land for hunting. 1/3 of the country has a lot of land, and these hunters do not need to impose on these wildlife refuges for their sport. If hunting were to be allowed in these areas designated wildlife refuges, the people that use these would not want to due to the fear of getting hit by the hunters. Wildlife refuges are used for various activities such as family hikes, runs, bike rides, and almost anything that gets people outside. Many Americans every day use wildlife refuges across the country as an outlet to either exercise or hike. If hunters were allowed on these refuges, then this would result in the hiking season of many Americans being destroyed. No one would want to hike because of a fear of the hunters in the area around them. It has been proved by a study done by the HD.gov Human Dimensions that getting outside increases human health, and there is a positive correlation between nature experiences and general well-being. Just being out in nature helps a lot with mental health, says Juan Lopez, who worked with Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge. By allowing hunting on these refuges, a lot of the positive effects of getting outdoors on them would be taken away due to their fear of the hunters. If hunting were to be allowed on these refuges, these hikers and avid users of wildlife refuges would not feel as safe and would not want to go on their outdoor activities. This would also affect the economy greatly. Millions of visitors are drawn each year to the refuge system's world-renowned wildlife-related recreation opportunities. This generates local economic benefits, said Margaret Everson, Principal Deputy Director at the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. In a recent study, United States Secretary of the Interior David Bernard announced that 53.6 million people visited national wildlife refuges in 2017. This had an economic impact of $3.2 billion on local communities and supported more than 41,000 jobs. By allowing hunting and reducing the number of visitors, the economy would be greatly impacted. On designated wildlife refuge lands, hunting should not be allowed because of the refuge's initial purpose, the land that hunters already have, and the effect it would have on the public who use these refuges. In this speech, I discussed how hunting should not be allowed on land intended for protection, how hunters have almost 1/3 of the country to hunt on, and how avid users of refuges would be affected by allowing hunting. Make sure to listen in your hometowns and do your own research on which refuges are in danger of being hunted. I know in my hometown of South Kingstown, Rhode Island, a lot of them are.